fought against slavery and its legacy. It's the story of these resistors from Sojourner Truth to Martin Luther King Jr. and what the struggle looks like today on 400 Years Taking the Knee.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Hey, bud, how's pajama day?
You mean school picture day?
No.
Life isn't always simple, but eating Heart Smart for American Heart Month is. Look for displays of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
This is our great-grandfather who had a dream in 1945 to open a family business in his name. This is our grandfather who expanded on that dream, bringing custom furniture to Chicago. This is our father and his brothers who grew that dream into the 10 showrooms here today. This is us, 4 sisters who want to make the generations before us proud while making Chicago homes beautiful. Since 1945, this is Smith.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
Hey, bud, how's pajama day?
You mean school picture day?
No.
Life isn't always simple, but eating Heart Smart for American Heart Month is. Look for displays of heart-healthy California walnuts at Jewel Osco.
Hi, Chicago. This is Rennie. You are watching WTTW.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by a grant from the William F. O'Connor Foundation in memory of Billy O'Connor.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
His number one issue was electing a Democratic House so he could be Speaker.
Former House Speaker Michael Madigan makes for the exits. He resigns from his seat after 50 years in office. We have full reaction.
The police department failed the public and it failed its members.
A special edition of Spotlight Politics digs into a damning report on how police handled racial justice protests last year.
They still have not responded to us at all.
15 days into a hunger strike, protesters are calling on the city to deny a permit for a metal scrapping plant on the southeast side.
A hedge fund's deal to buy Tribune Publishing, what it could mean for the Chicago Tribune.
Volunteering in the age of COVID, can it be done safely?
And Geoffrey Bear on how this week's storm compares to Chicago's most infamous blizzards and winters in an all-new Ask Geoffrey.
And as you mentioned, Amanda Vinicky here. I'm in South Deering for our latest Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. The Southeast Side community has an industrial past, and it has been in the news a lot because of that metal scrapping plant that you mentioned that is set to open later this year. But also, South Deering has large areas of green space, and they are undergoing massive improvements so that they're more accessible to residents and also to help them return more to their natural state. So we'll have more on that. But first, back to you guys in the studio.
Amanda, thank you. For some of today's top stories, the Chicago Police Department failed on several fronts in its response to the protests and unrest last summer sparked by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. This, according to a scathing new report from the city's watchdog. The Office of the Inspector General says the department was underprepared and ill-equipped, poorly documenting its use of force and without the ability to arrest large groups of people. The report says as a result, some of the people who destroyed city property and looted stores will never be charged, and officers who beat protesters will never be held accountable. In a written response, Police Superintendent David Brown acknowledges the department struggled with certain aspects of the response and will use the report to self-evaluate. Our Spotlight Politics team will have more of this story later in the broadcast. The Illinois Department of Public Health says more than 1,900 people have tested positive for the coronavirus since yesterday, including an additional 72 deaths. The state's total number of cases is more than 1,168,000, including 20,129 deaths. The state says this week's weather system continues to delay vaccine deliveries from the federal government, but officials are in contact with the CDC and other federal agencies to see what the state can do, if anything, to expedite receiving more doses. And police are looking for the driver of a hit and run that severely injured a member of the WTTW family. 31-year-old Alex Betzel, who works on our development team here at WTTW, was riding her bike at the intersection of Kimball and Addison Street when police say a dark SUV made an illegal turn and ran her over. The incident happened last Wednesday at 2:20 in the afternoon, leaving Alex in critical condition. She sustained multiple life-threatening injuries to her ribs and lungs and is still in the intensive care unit on a ventilator. Police released this photo of the suspected vehicle, a dark gray or black Buick Enclave, license plate AZ27854. Anyone with information is asked to call police. Alex is an avid bicyclist and was wearing a helmet at the time of the accident. And all of us here at WTTW wish her a speedy recovery. 50 years ago, a young politician from Chicago's Southwest Side was sworn into office as state representative. Today, Michael Madigan announces he has resigned, effective immediately, following a career as the longest-serving House Speaker in U.S. history. In those 50 years, Madigan amassed unparalleled political power as his Democratic Party dominated the state. But his tenure has brought consistent gridlock to state government, soaring budget and pension problems, and repeated allegations of pay-to-play. Paris Schutz joins us now with more. Paris, what's the latest?
Well, Brandis, this resignation today does not surprise most onlookers, given that Madigan lost re-election to his powerful perch as House Speaker when Chris Welch took over. So that rendered Madigan simply a state representative from the Southwest Side, how he started his career, as you mentioned, 50 years ago. And today it ends as Madigan announces his resignation in a statement saying, quote, 50 years ago, I decided to dedicate my life to public service. Simply put, I knew I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. I believe then and still do today that it is our duty as public servants to improve the lives of the most vulnerable and help hardworking people build a good life. These ideals have been the cornerstone of my work on behalf of the people of Illinois and the driving force throughout my time in the Illinois House. The son of police officer, a protege of former Mayor Richard J. Daley, Mike Madigan rose to become the most powerful politician in the state as House Speaker, building that massive machine to where he had almost universal control over what legislation passed and what didn't. It did seem like he was near invincible for so many years, but that's not the case. In 1994, he briefly lost his perch as House Speaker when Republicans gained control of the state.
The loss, in my judgment, was caused by a national trend in favor of the Republican Party for whatever reasons, and because of the weak state party ticket put up by the Democratic Party.
And Madigan was famously bitter over that, but he won the seat back in '96, and he did not relinquish it until this year. He truly believed in consolidating political power in the legislative branch, making governing the state that much harder for the 9 lucky or unlucky gentlemen that had to work with him, Republican or Democrat. He famously battled bitterly with convicted and commuted former Governor Rod Blagojevich, save for this one moment at the 2008 DNC where the two cast aside their differences for a big warm embrace. And the relationship wasn't much easier with Blagojevich's successor, Pat Quinn, who recounts that he got off to a terrible start with Madigan early in both of their careers when Pat Quinn pushed forward a referendum in the General Assembly that affected when lawmakers could get paid. That is something that enraged Mike Madigan.
Mike Madigan led to booing, and one of the legislators complained, and he said, gee, you're booing a fellow Irishman. And Mike Madigan said, he's not worthy of being called an Irishman. But that was one of the first times I interacted with Mike Madigan.
And Quinn says the relationship improved somewhat when he took over as governor in 2009, although that tenure was marked by budget battles and overtime sessions. Still, Quinn says the two were able to put aside their differences and get some things done, like pension reform for future employees, a tax hike, abolishing the death penalty, and marriage equality. And that was an issue that the previously more socially moderate Madigan came around on, quoting Pope Francis when that bill passed the House.
If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and he has goodwill, Who am I to judge?
But Quinn says there were many things that they opposed each other on, namely when Madigan supported the 2011 ComEd Smart Grid bill, which basically gifted the utility automatic rate increases.
And then I vetoed it. And I said, this is one of the worst things ever for consumers in Illinois. And Madigan led the drive to override that veto, and he was successful. And frankly, I think that was a huge mistake that he made. And it's harmed consumers in Illinois, and it's led to scandal. And that's one thing that I'm sure he wishes he had back. I sure hope he does.
And as we know, Brandis, Madigan's relationship with ComEd is heavy under the federal microscope.
Right, Paris. And, in more recent memory, though, that gridlock in Springfield, it didn't really improve much under Governor Bruce Rauner either, did it?
No, it made the relationship with Pat Quinn look like a honeymoon, because when Republican former Governor Bruce Rauner took over, there was a 2-year budget battle. Madigan refused to give in to Rauner's demands on the budget that would curb the power of unions. And so for 2 years, the state went without a budget, causing a massive bill backlog and deficits, and this to a state already drowning in red ink. And red ink in the state's employee pension system is also a major legacy of Madigan's tenure, more than $140 billion underfunded, although Madigan is certainly not the only person responsible for the fiscal mismanagement. And also a key part of his legacy, the political power that he wielded all across the state, in many state agencies, in agencies like Metra, where there were allegations that he pressured leaders there to hire loyalists. And today in a statement, House Republican leader Jim Durkin said, Representative Madigan's autocratic rule over the decades has not made Illinois a more prosperous nor competitive state. Our state is in shambles financially, structurally, and ethically. It's a bit more rosy of an assessment from Madigan's longtime number 2 in the State House, Barbara Flynn Curry, a former state rep from Hyde Park, who says his legislative achievements will stand out.
He was very strong on things like Freedom of Information Act, improving and protecting it, ethics reforms, an end to pay-to-play politics in the executive branch, expansion of opportunities for people to exercise the right to vote. He also did things on the social agenda. For example, without his leadership, Illinois would never have been a state that approved same-sex marriage before the United States Supreme Court said we had to.
But Paris, this day was not necessarily inevitable. His fall from power, though, started a few years ago.
Started about 2018, Brandis. The wheels really began to come off when a young former political staffer, Elena Hampton, came forward alleging sexual harassment from a supervisor of hers and alleging that Madigan did nothing about it and that his organization retaliated against her for coming forward. It led to more stories like this coming out, calling into question the ethics of the 13th Ward political organization that he led. And then last year with revelations that he was public official A in these grand sweeping indictments against ComEd and against other Madigan-connected officials, alleging bribery schemes, pay-to-play, though Madigan himself has not been charged. And though his legislative career comes to an end, some of his power still remains. He is still the chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois, and he has the heaviest weighted vote this weekend in choosing his successor. Madigan's campaign fund has about $13.5 million in it, and because of a grandfather law, he can convert some of that to personal use, although he has been using a lot of that for heavy legal fees. And, of course, we're going to have much more on this with Amanda and Heather later in the program.
That's right, Paris. We'll have a special edition of Spotlight Politics coming up a little bit later on. Thanks so much. There have been 7,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the 60617 zip code. That's the primary zip code for Chicago's largest community area, South Deering. The southeast side area has long been a hotbed for industry, and some residents have had enough, citing health and environmental concerns. Amanda Vinicky and producer Marissa Nelson spent the day in South Deering for this week's Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda joins us now from inside L&G Family Restaurant on Torrance Avenue. Amanda.
Brandis, as you can see, the LNG isn't serving customers right now. Bummer for me because they have some chocolate pancakes on special that look really delicious. They are open for indoor dining. It's just that the restaurant closes at 3 p.m. We do thank them very much for letting us in from the cold. Now, it is unintentionally ironic that we are doing this story from a restaurant because a major reason we wanted to come to South Deering for this week's In Your Neighborhood is because we wanted to check in with residents on a hunger strike. The point of contention, well, a metal scrapping plant, General Iron, closed on the north side in January, and then pending the city's signing off, plans to expand and open a bigger plant here in South Deering. Biology teacher Chuck Start says this is a prime example of environmental racism.
Taking a known polluter from an affluent part of the city and moving it to a predominantly Latinx and black neighborhood is a clear example of that. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's still, you have this community that is paying the cost of something that other people get to benefit from.
Stark is on day 15 of fasting after he says that traditional routes like writing letters and attending meetings didn't get officials' attention. He says going without eating, well, his energy is rising and falling. And while the city has not directly responded to the hunger strikers, he says he knows that Chicago officials are listening. Now, the parent company for the new Southside recycling facility declined an invitation for an interview, but an RMG spokesperson did join Chicago Tonight just last week and told us that the company had taken extra steps to control pollution.
The capture and control system, a filter, a thermal oxidizer that burns off volatile organic compounds, explosive prevention devices, and a wet scrubber that removes harmful particulate matter and volatile organic compounds from its emission stream.
Nearby at the East Side Health Center, Dr. Hickenbottom says that his top concern these days is encouraging people to get vaccinated from the coronavirus. He says there are two types of patients, those who are energetic, enthusiastic about getting it, and the others that he has to try to convince.
The biggest thing that we're hearing is that they just don't trust the vaccine right now. They say it's too new. It could have side effects. And, you know, I try to let them know that, you know, it's basically similar to the flu vaccine. You can get a minor side effect. I let them know that I've had the vaccine. I'm still here talking and trying to treat patients.
The juxtaposition, or really rather the evolution from industry to eco-recreation, is evident in South Deering's Big Marsh Park. It used to be a residential and commercial dumping site.
Lots of slag, which is a byproduct of the steelmaking industry, was dumped over the course of several decades. When the park district comes in, after they assess what types of debris are still there, they clean up the site. Sometimes we need to cap certain spaces to make them safer for the public and for nature to return. And then we go through a process of actually introducing native plants, trees.
He says that there has been a major reintroduction of birds. We could hear them tweeting in the background. You can't actually see much of Big Marsh Park. That is, our camera equipment wasn't much of a match for the mounds of snow, but the park is still open to the public from dusk to dawn, no matter the wind chill. We do have video from warmer days at the park. Projects in development for it include a nature center, camping site, and then building up a hill for mountain bike trails. Or if next winter brings more snow like this, they hope perhaps a sledding hill. Already, as you can see, that the park does feature a 31,000-foot asphalt pump track, and the asphalt, that is, pump track for bikers, rollerbladers, and skaters. That's Friends of Marsh Park is working to foster youth excitement about recreational cycling on two wheels with a joint program with After School Matters. This is Bike Ambassadors, and participants learn not only how to ride, but also how to repair and build bikes.
down the way that the Big Marsh is, I only saw trucks coming down from that side. So I'm like, when we actually went down there, it was like, oh my God, it's this big old space that's down there that I could have been going to this whole entire time and having fun with my friends.
That was 16-year-old Maria Tennyson, who says that before joining, she didn't even like biking, nor did she even know there was a huge green space in her neighborhood. Now, we cannot, of course, end this without mention of South Deering's most famous establishment, and that is Calumet Fisheries. Beloved by everyone from Anthony Bourdain for its fried shrimp and smoked shrimp and other fish. It is right on the 95th Street Bridge that Jake and Elwood jumped off in the Blues Brothers movie.
It started out as a business that two brother-in-laws bought way back in 1942. So they've kind of continued the same business, smoking fish the traditional way as an open flame smokehouse right next door. I know not a lot of people are able to do it no more. We got grandfathered in, so that's why our way of smoking is more of a historical way. It's the way they used to do it back then.
Now, Calumet Fisheries has always been takeout and cash only, so things haven't changed too much during COVID, but he says they do take the virus seriously, especially because the previous store manager, Carlos Rosa, did pass away in July from it. So on that sad note, unfortunately, I'm going to toss it back to you.
That is sad to hear, Amanda. Thank you, and we'll see you in a little bit. Now to Phil Ponce for details on a hedge fund purchasing Tribune Publishing. Phil.
Brandis, Tribune Publishing, which publishes the Chicago Tribune and other major newspapers across the country, says it has agreed to a deal to be bought by hedge fund Alden Global Capital, already the company's largest shareholder. The deal values the company at $630 million, but some Tribune journalists fear that Alden's history of deep cuts at other newsrooms means an important public voice could be seriously diminished. Joining us to discuss the deal and what it could mean are Brian Hegelke. He's editor and publisher of New City, which has written at length about the decline of the Chicago Tribune. Charles Whitaker, dean and professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. And Gregory Pratt, he's president of the Chicago Tribune Guild and a politics reporter at the Tribune. And we did invite Tribune Publishing to join this conversation, but they declined. We were unable to reach Alden Global, and their website does not provide any contact information for the company. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Charles Whitaker, Alden Global Capital, which owns just about a third of Tribune Publishing shares, has agreed to buy the rest of it, as we just mentioned. What do we know about Alden Global and what their track record is with other newspapers they own?
Well, we know that they've bought and currently own hundreds of papers from Denver to Boston. And we know that for the most part, their reputation has been as a pretty rapacious owner. They've hollowed out a lot of those papers for the sake of squeezing out maximum profit. They are in the business of making money and not necessarily in the business of producing great journalism.
Well, as we mentioned, we couldn't reach Alden Capital, but a statement that Alden Capital issued to the Tribune reads in part, "Our commitment to ensuring the sustainability of robust local journalism is well established, and this is part of that effort." Gregory Pratt, what do you think the Chicago Tribune's future looks like under an Alden ownership, if in fact this deal goes through?
Well, we're facing some very dark days. The Tribune has lost a lot of employees in the last couple of years. We were at about 168 in 2018, late 2018. We're at about 118 now. We're now facing a company that doesn't care about journalism, despite what it may purport to believe in statements that it gives to the press. Their track record is horrible. And we are facing a future where the company focuses on wringing out short-term profits instead of serving democracy and serving the citizens and serving people by holding powerful people accountable.
And Gregory, we did receive Tribune Publishing, as you know, did issue a statement. The board chair, Philip Franklin, released a statement that reads in part, over the past year, the company has taken a number of actions to adapt to an ever-changing business and industry environment, including the impact of COVID-19. These actions included strengthening the company's financial position, driving digital growth, and investing in high-quality content to better serve customers, employees, and communities. This positioning enabled the special committee to negotiate a premium all-cash price. Brian, you've been following what's happened with the Tribune in terms of its history. Put this in context.
Well, the interesting thing is that, the Chicago Tribune, back at the beginning of my career, was just an absolute dominant media company in Chicago and really in the country. And with a flourishing broadcasting business, a chain of major newspapers anchored by Chicago Tribune. They bought the Chicago Cubs and owned it. They really were kind of a lord of Chicago. And they used to have a reputation in the business world of being a really well-run company as well. I mean, if you took away the journalism conversation, as a corporate operator, they were considered very good. They stumbled and fell in the early 2000s. I don't remember the exact year when they bought the Los Angeles Times, which strategically on the face was an attractive acquisition for them. But timing was terrible. Price turned out to be way too high, and it put them into a bad position, and they fell into a run of really bad ownership. And this is kind of the third and, hopefully not final, but, definitely feels like it could be, somewhat of a final strike of bad owners for them.
Charles Whitaker, everyone knows that newspapers are struggling. There's been everything what's going on online and so forth. How much of it has to do with the Tribune's making poor decisions, and how much of it has to do with a challenging environment for all newspapers?
Well, the environment is certainly challenging for all newspapers. If this were simply a question of the Tribune leadership making bad decisions, then we would see examples of newspapers thriving elsewhere that made better decisions. But there was groupthink throughout the newspaper industry, which is why the industry is suffering so. Everyone got drunk on the cash that they had obtained through public stock options that made them these huge battleships that were very difficult to turn when the digital age came on. And they were very slow to acknowledge that the model that was built on display advertising and classified advertising was broken. And they were hoping to hold on to that for a very, very long time. But they couldn't. The ability to track readers that you can, in the way that you can digitally, the ability to attract those eyeballs has simply broken that business model. And I don't think there was a lot that Tribune managers could have done, but they certainly did make some bad strategic decisions along the way.
Greg Pratt, what do you see as the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is that the Chicago Tribune continues to exist as a sort of zombie paper in 5 to 10 years that has been gutted out and produces stuff and runs a lot of wire stuff and essentially doesn't do anything that is special or remarkable. I think that's far more likely than them completely killing the place, at least within the next 5 to 10 years. But that's now, that is a tremendously concerning scenario, not just for the newspaper and not just for the journalists. I speak as a citizen and as a resident of the city of Chicago, where the value of the Tribune is in what it provides to the community.
Charles Whitaker, the Baltimore Sun was purchased by a local group. Is there any potential that somebody with deep pockets could, even at this point, buy the Tribune and keep it running as an institution that does have that local connection, does have that local commitment?
I think that's certainly what people are hoping for. That's a Hail Mary, and I'm not so sure that there are angels. Certainly there are a lot of rich people in Chicago who could, and one would hope, are as civic-minded that they would want to maintain this glorious institution that has been so vital to the maintenance of the democracy and being a watchdog of public officials. One hopes that that's the case, but I'm not so sure. I hope that people understand what you lose when you lose local news and when you lose an institution that's as important as the Tribune, and that they will come together the way some wealthy civic-minded individuals in Baltimore did, the way a Jeff Bezos did in sort of saving the Washington Post. That remains to be seen.
Gregory Pratt, how about it? Has your group, have the employees reached out to potential donors and as part of a, quote, Hail Mary pass?
Well, it's the good news, bad news. The Tribune has had a number of people on its behalf, and including some of its reporters, David Jackson and Gary Marks in particular, reach out to hundreds of people who have the means to try to do something to save the Tribune, and they have so far not been successful.
Charles Whitaker, Gregory Pratt, and Brian Hegelke, thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
And up next, how a volunteer expo that draws hundreds has been reimagined for the pandemic. So please stay with us.
A local volunteer expo drew 2,500 attendees a year ago, but can the same event take place this year during the pandemic? The Peggy Notabert Nature Museum says it has found a way. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now, more with some details. So, Patty, is this volunteer expo going to take place this year?
Yeah, it is. It's just going to be taking place where everything takes place these days, on Zoom. So they figured out a way to, instead of have volunteers go from like booth to booth, you will go from Zoom breakout room to Zoom breakout room to meet with representatives from more than 75 nonprofit organizations that are in need of volunteers.
I'm shocked it's taking place via Zoom, Patty,
Yeah.
just like everything else. All right, so did the Notabert Museum consider canceling this important event altogether?
Yeah, you know, that was actually the very first question that I asked them, and they said it was the first question that they asked themselves. Do we need to do this? And they said they surveyed hundreds of organizations that had participated in the past, and the response that they got was yes, absolutely. These organizations do still have a need for volunteers, and they have opportunities for volunteers because a lot of them have pivoted like the rest of us, and they have found ways to keep volunteers engaged, whether it's in person or online.
And certainly a lot of these organizations very crucial now because of the pandemic. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website, where you can learn how to sign up for the event. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And now, Brandis, back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, how the southeast side is coping with the coronavirus. We talk with 10th Ward Alderman Susan Sadlowski-Garza.
There was confusion throughout the command staff about who was responsible for what.
A special edition of Spotlight Politics looks at how police handled last year's racial justice protests, plus more on the Madigan resignation. And Geoffrey Bear on how this week's snowfall ranks against Chicago's biggest winter storms in an all-new Ask Geoffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. Some aldermen and community groups are blasting the mayor's office for using $281.5 million of COVID-19 federal relief funds to pay salaries and benefits for the Chicago Police Department.
The same anger we had about the Republican caucus on a congressional level, using CARES Act money to boost up the military-industrial complex, is the same anger we should feel here on a local municipal level, that these resources that were desperately needed in an emergency we have never seen before has been put into our overfunded police department.
Some aldermen say they weren't provided with a detailed account of how the federal relief funds would be spent back when the city council voted on spending in June. 9 voted against the plan at the time. The groups say the money could have been spent on rental assistance for residents. City budget officials say had they not used the CARES Act funding in this way, the burden would have been passed on to taxpayers. You can read about why the city says it needed to spend more money on the police department at the time on our website. Famed Chicago comedy club, the Second City, has a new owner. This is only the second time the club has been available for sale in its 62-year history. The New York-based private equity firm ZMC announces it has purchased the company for an undisclosed amount. The firm says it's managed a diverse group of media and communications enterprises. The improv and sketch-based comedy and education venue is known for launching the careers of comedy greats, ranging from Dan Aykroyd to Tina Fey. And now to Paris. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Brandis. And now let's check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day in South Deering as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Paris, earlier today, I spoke with Alderwoman Susan Sedlowski-Garza, whose 10th ward includes South Deering, and I began by asking her about that hunger strike.
I'm humbled by what these folks are doing, and people have to understand that, you know, this action was generated because people felt like they're not being heard, right? And no one should have to starve to be heard. They brought more attention to the issue, which they're succeeding in what they're doing. So I'm humbled by this movement. But it's hard for me because, you know, I had a great relationship with the environmental justice community, and there's a federal there's a lawsuit, there's a HUD complaint, which I'm named in it. So now I can't talk about any of this, which it's very hard for me. It's very hard for me. It's a bad situation to be in.
Were you told, or can you elaborate on why you were included in that complaint?
I don't have any idea why I was named, and I'm actually, to say that I discriminate against people when I've spent my whole life on the right side trying to fight for working class families in this neighborhood, literally my whole life. And you know, yeah, I think it's wrong, and it's put a huge wedge between me and the environmental justice community, and it's unjustified.
Is that going to hinder their efforts in the long run to prevent this metal scrapping facility from coming to the...
Well, here's one thing that you have to know. The metal, RMG has been in my ward for 29 years. So it's not moving from anywhere. It's been here. You know, but what people have to understand too, folks that live here are very frustrated with the cumulative effect of always getting, you know, we're not getting beautiful skyscrapers or things like that. We're getting industry, and there has to be jobs, because if you're not putting food on your table, you're not going to care about anything. But we have to have clean jobs and jobs that don't make people sick.
When you talk about jobs coming to this area, the ward's industrial past and future, how has that been complicated, of course, by COVID on both ends, presumably from a health one as well as recruiting jobs, keeping jobs?
So for us, you know, when I was a kid, we had 134,000 steelworker jobs in the 10th ward. We had 9 steel mills. Those jobs left, and so did the grocery stores and the shoe stores, and every kind of, the residual effect was like dominoes. So it's been, during COVID, we're very lucky because we have a lot of new developments that are happening here. So Ford just expanded, put 500 more people to work. There's people that are, I'm looking now at facilities on Avenue O for retail and restaurants. So I'm feeling very positive with all the good things that are happening here, and that's what I want to focus on, because our ward has things that no other ward in the city has, and there's a lot of wonderful amenities here too.
Once again, thanks so much to Alderwoman Susan Sedlowski-Garza of the 10th Ward. And coming up, we will have an opponent to that metal scrapping facility. But for now, back to you.
Such a hot topic in the southeast side. All right, Amanda, thank you so much. And now we go back to Brandis for an all-new Ask Geoffrey. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. A collective groan may or may not have been heard around Chicago this morning when the city awoke to find it was snowing again. Geoffrey Baer joins us now with more on how this recent blast of snowy weather stacks up against Chicago's most infamous winter storms in this week's Ask Geoffrey. And welcome back, Geoffrey, of course. So this week's question is, how does this week's massive snowfall in Chicago compare to past years and storms?
Well, Brandis, you just look out my back window here. There's no place like Chicago.
Oh, I see what you did there. Well, there's no business like snow business.
Oh, this is snow laughing matter, Brandis. Okay, before we lose our entire audience with all these horrible puns, depending on where you were in the region, this week's snow brought in anywhere from 7.5 to almost 19 inches of the white stuff, officially making the past 3 weeks Chicago's snowiest in more than 40 years, according to the National Weather Service's Chicago office. So far, about 45 inches of snow have been recorded this winter. That's well above the 36 inches we usually average. And that's the official measurement taken at O'Hare. And it's only February. This week, we saw a combination of a regular storm system with something called lake effect snow, which occurs when cold air moves over warmer water, leading to significantly more snowfall in neighborhoods and suburbs near the lakefront. We're still far short of the all-time record for a single winter, when 90 cumulative inches fell in 1978 and 79. Nor have we seen anything like the biggest snowstorm in our history, which was in 1967. And we'll talk about more both of those in just a minute. It does seem like every generation of Chicagoans gets its own mammoth snowstorm or blizzard. There were huge snowfalls in the late 1920s and early 30s when the city had near record snow 3 years in a row, but none of them quite compares to that infamous storm of January 1967. I'm sure some of our viewers remember it. It snowed for 30 straight hours in Chicago, leaving behind 23 inches of accumulation. That's the most ever from a single weather event in Chicago. That surprise blizzard left 20,000 cars and more than 1,000 buses stranded on city streets and expressways. Wind gusts greater than 50 miles an hour created snow drifts as high as 6 feet. The flip side, though, was an outpouring of neighborliness and community spirit across Chicago. People helped shovel sidewalks and helped each other push out cars, and something like what we've seen in the recent weeks.
That's right. Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of that lately. Geoffrey, this being Chicago, of course, snowstorms over the years, they can also cause a storm of political repercussions, right?
Oh, yeah. So let's flash forward to that huge storm in 1979, which left behind 20 inches and once again brought the entire region to a standstill. In that storm, City Hall's response was bungled, and then Chicago Mayor Michael Blandick took the blame. With the streets clogged for days, the city's L trains became severely overcrowded. And in response, the city closed a series of L stations temporarily, but most of them were in predominantly black neighborhoods on the south and west sides. That political backlash was immediate, and underdog mayoral candidate Jane Byrne took full advantage of that. Here's a bit of an ad from her 1979 campaign.
No one could stop the snow, but good planning can prevent the collapse of public transportation and clean this city up fast. I'm Jane Byrne, Commissioner of Consumer Sales under the late Mayor Daley. He taught me about planning, he taught me about government, and he taught me about people.
And of course, Jane Byrne would go on to win the election, and she became Chicago's first female mayor.
And Geoffrey, you know, beyond this week's snow, we've had some pretty intense winters in recent years, too.
Yeah, in recent memory, you'll probably remember the 2011 Groundhog Day blizzard, which some people called Snowmageddon. 21 inches were recorded at O'Hare. Now, that was just 2 inches shy of that all-time record we talked about earlier. The snow came quickly, and it stranded hundreds of cars on Lakeshore Drive, trapping many people for hours. And so in the aftermath, the city installed these removable barriers on the drive, which will allow people to turn around and exit in the opposite direction in emergencies. And Mayor Lightfoot activated those removable barriers earlier this week as a precaution. And then, of course, in 2019 came the polar vortex, when the city saw temperatures dip all the way to negative 23 degrees, the coldest recorded temperature in 34 years. So take a look at this. This is a video that I took 2 years ago in 2019 of my daughter. And you can actually see the liquid in this bubble wand freeze right before your eyes. Now, while we haven't gotten quite as cold this February, or I should say it has been very cold this February, we haven't come close to that record. Or any record, really. The title belongs to February 1895, when the average temperature was a chilly 4.7 degrees for the entire month.
Wow, Geoffrey, you look at some of this video and you think, no way, but we're living through it. It actually happened. I had to get one last one in.
Good job.
Thank you, Geoffrey Bear. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about Chicago's most infamous snowstorms. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Geoffrey Baird. That's at WTTW.com/AskGeoffrey. Up next, how some South Deering community members are fighting General Iron's bid to open a new facility.
Ask Geoffrey is brought to you in part by BMO Harris Bank.
Wow, you ready?
Yeah, let me just grab my wallet.
Uh-oh, I've seen this before. Wallet way too big, skinny jeans too skinny.
I'll just carry it.
Before you break something, you should know you don't actually need a wallet. With BMO Harris, you can just take cash out with your phone. Or if you need to, you can pay them with Zelle. That works? Yeah. You're stuck, aren't you?
Smile.
Woo, those jeans are way too tight.
That feeling you get when no wallet is no big deal. That's the BMO effect.
Now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who spent the day reporting on Chicago's South Deering neighborhood on the southeast side as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda, what do you got?
Yeah, Paris had a moment to adjust my mask before being joined by Peggy Salazar of the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And we have talked a lot about this new metal scrapping facility trying to expand or come here. But already there's a lot of industry. What can you tell us about the impact that has on South Deering and its residents?
Well, here's the impact it has. We keep saying that the industry that's here is polluting industry. We are zoned for dirty industry. Dirty industry equates to polluting industry. So every time they add something to what's already here, that it just intensifies those effects. And that's why we've been saying we don't need any more. We look at the cumulative impacts of all of this industry. And unfortunately, the regulating industries tend to look at them individually. So they permit each one individually. But that's not how they operate, because they all operate together all at one time. And so this is why we don't need any more.
Is it that part of this, of course, a lot of this criticism stemming from the shutting down of operations in the Lincoln Park area while looking to expand here, is that really it? Or is there no room for any facility like this in Chicago?
Well, that's a good question, okay, because we definitely support recycling. Recycling is an important operation, okay, we support it. But we have said many times, and Lincoln Park, the community of Lincoln Park has said, this does not belong, this type of business does not belong in a residential area. Okay, it's a detriment. So we've been saying this for a long time. Certain businesses should not be operating in the backyards of communities. And this is what we've been repeating for quite a while, and we're trying to get that changed.
Now, representatives of reserve management groups say that they have gone to great lengths to make sure that this isn't a major polluter and that these are myths being espoused by members of the environmental community. What's your response?
My response is this. If you need a permit from the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, you are a polluting industry. It's as simple as that. That's why you need a permit, because you will be emitting something into the air, the water, or the ground.
And we have about 30 seconds left, and so with that, can you please address on the issue of permitting? This is before we know there's a federal investigation. What role do you hope that will play before the city makes a decision?
We're hoping that somebody will stand up for communities like ours. This is what we're hoping. We're hoping someone will put a stop to this continued practice of dumping into communities that have little voice. So that's what we're hoping for. This is why we filed for these complaints, because we're saying we're enough already. This is clear discrimination.
Thank you so very much again to Peggy Salazar. She is with the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And now back to you.
All right, Amanda, we're going to see you in a mere second, because up next, details of Michael Madigan's exit from Illinois politics in a special edition of Spotlight Politics. So stick around.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
The Chicago Police Department mishandled almost every facet of its response to the protests touched off by the killing of George Floyd last year. That's the damning finding from the city inspectors general. And the report comes on the same day that, as we mentioned earlier, former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan announces he's resigning his seat in Springfield. We are digging into both of those major stories in a special edition of Spotlight Politics. So, welcoming back the team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Guys, we spoke with Deputy IG Deborah Witzberg earlier today about the report, who said that police failed to keep a clear record of their actions.
And that's a problem in terms of the pursuit of individual accountability, where individual police officers are accused of misconduct. I think, that may be a problem that the city faces in litigation and in, a variety of other settings. There are also sort of philosophical consequences of that and relational ones. And I think it's really important to note that these failures of leadership in the department, endangered members of the public, and they represented a failure of members of the department.
Heather, you've been covering this report on our website. Now, despite the muddled record, the IG's office found failures in virtually every aspect of the response. Long and short-term planning, coordination, training, go on.
Well, and not only that, but they did not document when officers used force. And anybody who was out on the streets during these protests or were watching Chicago Tonight while we're showing a lot of instances where officers were using force, including baton strikes, as well as OC spray. None of that was properly documented, the Inspector General found. And the report said that will have potentially profound consequences because the department is in the middle of trying to rebuild the trust that it lost over a series of years, if not decades, in how it policed Chicago's communities, especially those on the south and the west side. We can't forget that this police department is under a federal court order to reform because an investigation by the federal government in 2017 found that it unconstitutionally violated the civil rights of Black and Latino Chicagoans. And this will add to those concerns that the police department has not made enough changes when addressing these issues.
Paris, is it surprising to see the IG release such, a scathing report?
I wouldn't think it's surprising to anybody who was there or watched these events unfold on the news last summer, not only in the Loop, but other areas of River North, and then all across the city. Neighborhoods were absolutely devastated, and most observers said they hadn't seen anything like that since civil unrest back in the 60s, that kind of devastation. And so, no, I don't think anyone's surprised. And this is also as, there was all kinds of turnover at the top of CPD. The superintendent, David Brown, had basically, he'd only been in the job a few months. There was an interim superintendent before that. And then before that, Eddie Johnson had resigned in scandal. So there's always so much turnover at CPD. And I wonder how much that plays into all these problems the department has. There can never be any steady kind of long-term leadership, and thus you have a situation, as Heather said, where officers weren't even trained on a mass arrest scenario, and you had folks that were causing problems get away, and you had folks that weren't doing anything get arrested.
Amanda, this report backs up a lot of the complaints that demonstrators and their supporters made at the time about poor policing. But, as Heather just mentioned, getting reform passed can be very thorny. Does this provide reform advocates with very useful evidence?
I think it does. Not that they would say that they needed any more, particularly in light of what happened with George Floyd, let alone what happened to Laquan McDonald in Chicago. I think they would say that there has been plenty already that shows the need for reform. But yes, this certainly buttresses their argument there, and perhaps may also convince those who were not as much on that side to give further credence to it. But again, there is already a consent decree, but the CPD has fallen behind in getting that enacted. I would also add, however, that perhaps there might be pressure as well from officers who out on the streets there, and when you read this report, the danger that they were in their own lives being compromised by the lack of preparation in this situation.
Heather, should we expect the mayor or the city council to take some action out of this?
You know, the city council and the mayor have really been reluctant in recent months to do much more than to hold a hearing on inspector general reports. I think what we have to keep an eye on is the report coming from the independent monitoring team, which is charged with helping the federal judge implement the consent decree. They also conducted a probe and investigation of the conduct of the police department during the protests, and they have the ability to go to the federal judge and say, here's what the police department did, and here's what we think that they should be forced to do or to change. So that is really where the teeth I think is going to come into play. But there is no doubt that the mayor is going to face tough questions about Superintendent Brown's handling of the protests, and also her own, which comes in for pretty tough criticism from the watchdog.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of time left, and as we reported earlier, another very big political story today, as you all know, former House Speaker Michael Madigan, as we've reported several times, soon to be former state representative Michael Madigan. Amanda, did you ever think that you would see a day when he would choose to leave his office?
No. In short answer, no. In part because he clearly loved the job. Sure, he also probably loved the power, but I mean, I think you could see an evidence of that in the statement that we got from Madigan today. It was, I think, the third paragraph where he talked about using the legislature's mandatory veto power. I mean, that he cited as one of his prime accomplishments. I think that shows you how much a student of Illinois politics, as well as some would say really the teacher for Democrats when it comes to this. So no, I'm certainly very surprised, and further, particularly because he was really, I think, forced out when he lost the speakership. That was the big downfall. But that at this time, while he's certainly under scrutiny for that ComEd corruption scandal, as he has repeatedly said, he is innocent, and he has not faced any charges that would typically be something that would force a legislator out at a time like this, somebody as powerful as he.
Now, in the statement he released announcing his resignation, it contained some notes of defiance, touting his support for freedom of information, ethics and campaign finance laws. He also said this, quote, "It's no secret that I have been the target of vicious attacks by people who sought to diminish my many achievements lifting up the working people of Illinois. The fact is, my motivation for holding elected office has never wavered. I have been resolute in my dedication to public service and integrity, always acting in the interest of the people of Illinois." Paris, you know, we've got 60 seconds. Is it in keeping with Madigan's character to remain defiant on his way out the door?
Well, sure. He's blamed the media for everything for the last 20, 25 years as journalists, started doing their jobs and looking into this sprawling political organization that he's built that touches all reaches of the state of Illinois. So it is, and one other surprising note about this today, when he initially sent his statement to the media this morning, he said he was going to resign at the end of the month. Fast forward to this evening, he said his resignation is effective immediately. I don't know what that's about, although there's going to be a committee vote for his replacement where, once again, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, the voters aren't choosing his replacement. Political insiders are choosing the replacement, and the political insider with the heaviest weighted vote, Mike Madigan, and there's already a name floated out there as to who the political onlookers believe will be the successor, and it's going to be the 13th Ward Superintendent. That's the name that's being floated.
Although, Paris, I think all of us learned our lesson with last time. The person everybody predicted was not the one who came out.
That's why they play the game.
With the
they play the game.
Yep, you got to play the game. So obviously, all three of you will be watching that. We'll talk about it next time. Thanks to Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz, of course. And you can find out more about the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team on our website. And while you're there, make sure to read our piece about the city's closing of an Old Town restaurant for violating COVID guidelines. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, sponsoring a free continuing legal education program for over a decade for lawyers across the state.
This evening's presentation of